Hello and welcome to NewsClick. Today we are going to be talking about the unfolding events in Pakistan and the ongoing assault by the Pakistani forces in South Waziristan. And to discuss this, we have with us today Professor Aijaz Ahmad, well-known political analyst. Aijaz, on this show earlier, we had discussed the Pakistani assault in the Swat Valley in taking on at least one segment of the Taliban or the insurgency in Pakistan, by whatever name you call it. The question I wanted to pose to begin with is, are we witnessing a sequential taking on of one area after another in an atmosphere of uncertainty as to how stable the previous area is? Has Swat actually been pacified, and are we now moving to South Waziristan? Are we going to see South Waziristan pacified and then move to North Waziristan? Or how do you see this panning out?
Well, first of all, Raghu, I believe that what you're dealing with here is Pashtun nationalism, which has at the moment been wrapped up in an Islamic garb. So these are sections of essentially the same movement. The second point is that these are essentially guerrillas, mobile forces, right, and you don't engage them in one big dramatic battle and wipe them out. Right. We know very well that the great majority of the actually insurgents in Swat withdrew immediately into southeastern provinces of Afghanistan and partly into Waziristan. So all that the army does is to disperse them. Right. Once the army withdraws or the offensive comes to an end, they come back. And these assaults and above all American drones have actually created a far greater unity among them than there used to be.
In this current battle in Waziristan, are we still witnessing the Pakistan army taking on essentially the Pakistani Taliban, what you're calling the Pashtun nationalist forces? Or are we seeing a closer contact between the Pakistan army and its opponents among the Al-Qaeda elements? We heard yesterday of the assault on a town dominated by Uzbek fighters. So are we seeing the clashes coming more now towards Al-Qaeda and those forces?
Well, I mean, Al-Qaeda is one of those words that one doesn't know what that actually means. These are Uzbek fighters who came to fight in Afghanistan a long time ago, immediately after the US assault. Right. Then they came to the rear, which is Waziristan. None of them recognize the Durand line. They believe they're fighting in essentially the same Pashtun homeland. Let me put it this way. Just as Pashtun society is itself divided into tribes and lineages and this, that, and the other, and yet has a very strong identity as a Pashtun people, you see virtually the same pattern repeated among these forces, these insurgents. There is a very strong identity of Waziri tribes, or people who were in Swat and so on. And then there are Uzbeks and so on. So there are internal differences. Yeah. But because of complete unity of purpose between the Pakistani army and the Americans, they're all working together. Right. Where exactly Al-Qaeda is, we don't know. Yeah. So there's that. Again, Pakistan army, we don't know what that means, what their intention really is. They're being driven by the Americans. Yeah. This much we know. But we know, for example, that after Bombay bombings, and so on, Pakistani Taliban said, well, if India attacks Pakistan, we will fight India. And two lieutenant generals of Pakistan went on television saying that these are Pakistani patriots.
But would it be at least correct to say something like, in terms of the distinctions between these different groups, there are some groups whose attentions are focused essentially on Afghanistan. There are some groups whose attentions are at least now focused on the Pakistani state, and there are some groups who are biding their time, waiting to see which way the wind is blowing.
I would rather put it sequentially, that these were all the people in NWFP and in the tribal regions looked at themselves as the rear for the struggle in Afghanistan. Had the Pakistan army not fought on behalf of the Americans, these people would not have pitched themselves against.
The Pakistani state.
So if any of them or all of them have turned against the Pakistani armed forces, it is because of what the Pakistani armed forces are doing. Basically, in the rear, their main task was to cut the supply lines for NATO, where 80 to 90% of the supplies for NATO forces and American forces were going through Pakistan. And the Pakistan army took it upon itself to protect those lines and came to clash. And as you know, they've been fighting time and again and so on. So there, it is out of that defensive position that now they're taking offensive positions of bringing violence to Islamabad, Lahore, and so on.
There seems to be one major force among the Taliban whom neither the Pakistani state has hitherto attacked, nor surprisingly even the Americans have tried to take on. And those are the original Afghan Taliban leadership of Mullah Omar and those people, the so-called Quetta Shura, who are sitting supposedly in Quetta now. And at least that theater seems to be relatively quiet. And there have been some reports recently that this is a deliberate stratagem on part of both Pakistan and the United States to reserve their ammunition against the Afghan Taliban leadership, because tomorrow there may be some kind of a compromise or a rapprochement in order to build for a stable Afghanistan.
Where exactly this so-called Quetta Shura is, whether it's in Quetta, which I doubt very much, or whether it is in those Pakhtun areas of Balochistan, we don't know. Yes, I think there are 2 or 3 different things going on, but the most important one is that not only that they will someday talk to the Taliban, the discussions with the Taliban have been going on for at least 1 year, both in United Arab Emirates and in Saudi Arabia, which have been facilitated by the Saudi government itself. But then secondarily, there's also the issue that there is a very big insurgency going on in Balochistan already. And if you start bombing Balochistan as well as Waziristan and so on, you open a hornet's nest, and then you have a very, very long front on which you're fighting.
In this present unfolding situation, one knows that the Pakistani assault and its implications, its ramifications with bombings here and there are not being particularly well received by the Pakistani people, who see it increasingly as actions taken at the behest of the United States. And most of the recent surveys in Pakistan have shown that the Americans are even more unpopular in Pakistan than they are either in Afghanistan or in Iraq. How do you see this in terms of different sections of Pakistani society? The army, how it's responding, the political class and how it's responding, the media and the public at large.
About the population at large, I think you're absolutely right. Poll after poll after poll has shown that 85 to 95% of Pakistanis have a very negative opinion of the United States. By and large, I think that the thought process in Pakistani middle classes is we wish the Pakistan army took it upon itself to do all this, but we wish they did it without the Americans. Yes. But then Americans are going to give us $7 billion for civilian infrastructure and so on, which we need very, very badly. So we should have access to this money, but we should have no conditions attached.
And the political class is there. Does there continue to be divisions, for example, between the Pakistan People's Party and the Muslim League of Nawaz Sharif? as appears to be from some discussions in Parliament and outside?
Well, I actually don't think that either of them is a proper political party. The same Mr. Nawaz Sharif, who was overthrown by the military and who has spent 8 years saying the military should have no role in politics, the military has to be under civilian control and so on and so forth. As soon as the Kerry-Lugar bill asks for the civilian to take charge, he leads the movement against that.
That's right.
You know, so these are highly opportunistic. That is, I think, part of the misfortune in Pakistan, that there is no settled political class in Pakistan in that sense.
Thank you, Aijaz. We will be watching this situation in the weeks to come, and we'll certainly revert to this topic pretty soon.